A large portion of hand surgeons treat patients non-operatively.
In terms of the surgeries that you do, can you describe for us the types of surgeries that you will perform?
So again, I limit my practice to hand, wrist, and elbow. I would say approximately 75% or so of my practice is limited to the hand itself. And this really varies from anything from conditions like carpal tunnel syndrome to tendinitis to injuries such as amputations, fractures, sharp lacerations, etc.
Over the course of your 22 years of practice, how many surgeries would you estimate you've performed?
I perform about 300 to 400 surgeries a year, so a rough estimate would be approximately 10,000, maybe a little less.
Where are you currently licensed?
In New York.
And how long have you been licensed in New York?
I've been licensed in New York since 1994, so that would be 28 years.
And do you have any certifications?
Yes.
And can you tell us about those?
I am board certified by the American Board of Orthopedic Surgery, and I have a Northwell Health, and I'm also the president-elect of the New York Society for Surgery of the Hand.
In what professional organizations are you a member?
I'm a member of multiple orthopedic organizations, including the American Board of Orthopedic Surgery, the American Association of Orthopedic Surgery, and the American Society for Surgery of the Hand, as well as the New York Society for Surgery of the Hand.
Have you published any articles in your field?
Yes, I have.
Have you testified as an expert before?
Yes, I have.
Can you ballpark for us how many times?
Certainly less than 10 over the past 22 years.
Your Honor, at this time, we'd like to offer Dr. Gilbert as an expert in the field of orthopedic surgery, specializing in the hand.
All right, any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
So moved.
So, Dr. Gilbert, what work were you asked to do in connection with this case?
So I was asked to review medical records, radiographs, pictures, as well as testimonies and depositions related to Mr. Depp's finger injury.
Okay. And to your understanding, what is Mr. Depp's explanation of how his finger was injured?
He describes that he was in Australia and his right hand was over the side of a bar when a vodka bottle was thrown. Multiple other explanations, but I think the one that was brought out was by Ms. Hurd, who believed that Mr. Depp was holding a landline and out of anger was punching it against the wall, and this resulted in his right middle finger injury.
Okay. Based on your review of the medical records and other documents in connection with Mr. Depp's finger injury, how would you describe the nature of the injury to Mr. Depp's finger?
Well, the nature of the injury was he had what we describe as a comminuted fracture of the distal phalanx, meaning there was a fracture of the tip of the finger, and comminuted meaning that there were multiple pieces. So this is some type of blunt force with a high mechanism of injury. He also sustained loss of the tissue along what's called the ulnar side of the finger towards the little finger. And this appeared, based upon my review of the pictures, to be some type of sharp laceration because it represented a clean edges of the wound.
Can we take a look at Plaintiff's Exhibit 60. And pull up to go to page 3. And Dr. Gillard, are you familiar with this document?
Yes.
And what is it?
So these are two radiographs, x-rays of Mr. Depp's finger, his middle finger.
Okay. Sorry, just to stop you, but Your Honor, may we publish this to the jury as a demonstrative?
Any objection?
Está viendo unas radiografías ahora.
All right, we'll identify it as 60.
As a comminuted fracture, meaning there are multiple pieces at the tip. There's also
In your opinion, could this injury have been sustained in the manner Mr. Depp described?
I do believe so.
And how might that work? How might a thrown vodka bottle produce an injury like this?
So vodka bottle, which is a hard object, would have crushed the tip of the finger, resulting in the comminuted fracture. And in addition, as the vodka bottle broke, the glass would have lacerated the finger, resulting in the soft tissue loss that was also seen with this injury.
What's your assessment of the description of the cause of the injury offered by Ms. Hurd?
I think that's highly unlikely.
And why is that?
Because in general, when an injury is caused by punching against a wall or a hard object, it is extremely rare to see an injury to the tips of the fingers, which is seen with Mr. Depp's injury. Generally, you're holding something with a fist, and that in general leads to injuries most commonly of the knuckles here, or fractures of the metacarpals. We call these boxer fractures. Second most common after those would be injuries to these, but as you can see, if you're holding something and hitting against something, it is very unlikely that the tips of the fingers will be injured. In addition, just taking into account the radiographs and the pictures of the injury, I would not believe that solely a blunt force against a wall would result in the soft tissue loss.
What other injuries, if any, would you expect to see on Mr. Depp's hand if the injury had occurred as Ms. Hurd described?
So if that were the cause of the injury, that would be a dorsally directed. So this is the dorsal in the back of the hand as opposed to the palmar side. So if you're punching against something, you would certainly expect an injury to the nail bed, and those are always seen in those type of injuries. If there is an injury to the tip of the finger, which again I said is rare, so you would see either a loss of the nail or blood underneath the nail called a subungual hematoma.
In your review of the medical records, did you see any sign of anything like that?
None whatsoever.
In your view, is the injury? Can you explain to us exactly why you think the injury is consistent with Mr. Depp's description?
Well, again, his hand. He describes his hand being held over a marble bar, which is a firm, something firm, unyielding, and the bottle hit against the finger. So basically the finger was crushed, resulting in, again, what I described as a comminuted fracture. And as Mr. Depp described, the bottle exploded, so it's certainly reasonable that the glass that exploded as well led to the soft tissue loss along the ulnar aspect of his finger.
Now, did you observe the testimony of Dr. Richard Moore?
Yes, I did.
And he testified about Mr. Depp's finger injury as well?
Correct.
Did you agree with Dr. Moore's testimony?
Certain parts of his testimony I did, yes,
Okay.
but not all of it.
Focusing on the parts that well, first of all, why don't you tell us what you agree on?
Well, I agreed in terms of his interpretation of the x-rays, saying that he had a comminuted fracture and this was some type of high force injury.
Okay. What did you disagree with?
Well, I disagreed with several things that he said. He first said that he does not believe that the mechanism of injury could be, as described by Mr. Depp, holding the hand on the side of a marble bar, because he said it was all a palmar injury, and there was a palmar component to the injury. I'm talking about the soft tissue loss, but there was also a dorsal, meaning the back of the finger. So the soft tissue loss was actually, if you looked at the pictures which were shown when Dr. Moore testified, the injury goes like this. So it's an angled or an oblique type injury. And there's no way that anybody could determine whether or not it was a palmar directive force, meaning from the palm side, or dorsally directive force. But certainly either are plausible.
Okay. Anything else come to mind that you disagreed with?
Well, he also described that this was he thought that this was a pinching, or what he described as an avulsion type injury. And that's referring to the soft tissue loss. That's certainly possible, but if you look at the pictures that were shown when he testified, the laceration looked fairly clean. There were clean edges. It was not jagged. And generally, when you have an avulsion or a pinch type injury, you see a very irregular border to the skin. It's pinched off, you can imagine, as opposed to something that's cleaner that would be lacerated by, let's just say, a piece of glass or a knife or whatever. And that's more consistent with the pictures of Mr. Depp's injury.
And we're using the term soft tissue loss, and just to make sure we're on the same page, can you just tell us very quickly what you're referring to there?
Right, so there were two components to this injury. One, the fracture of the bone, and two, he had loss of the soft tissues so that the bone was exposed. So that amputated part that was found at the bar.
Now, you were saying that Dr. Moore testified that this was an avulsion, and meaning a pinching injury, right?
Correct.
Why do you believe it's more likely that it was a laceration?
Well, again, in general, a pinch-type injury results in, one, much more damage to the remaining tissue, but the remaining tissue is usually very irregular. The borders are jagged, and that's not what was depicted in the pictures.
Dr. Moore also testified that he thought a vodka bottle might not have sufficient force to cause the injury here. Is that your understanding of his testimony?
Correct.
What's your response to that?
I certainly believe that a vodka bottle that was thrown from a distance against a hand that was resting on a marble bar is more than sufficient force to result in this fracture and soft tissue loss.
Now, in looking at the medical records and the pictures of Mr. Depp's hand, what was the condition of his nail?
There was no injury to the nail.
And other than what you've already told us, how does that factor into your analysis, if at all? The fact that there was no injury to the nail?
Well, it makes it highly unlikely that the mechanism of injury described by Ms. Heard resulted in this injury, because you really would always see an injury to the nail and or nail bed.
Do you have any opinion regarding the direction of the injury?
Well, it's certainly based upon the soft tissue loss. It's an angled injury,
Lo que
or
está
we
diciendo el
call it
doctor
medically
es
an
que
oblique
lo que
injury,
dijo Amber
because
Heard
the
es
soft
muy
tissue
poco
loss
probable que
is
haya
at an
sucedido
angle.
porque las botellas de
He
vodka
lost some of the tissue on the
en general
back
tienen
of the
un
finger as
corte
well as the palm side,
específico, o no sé.
primarily along the palm side. But
Algo así.
other than that, you can't make any assumptions. Unless you saw a videotape of this injury, nobody could tell you definitively what the direction of the injury was.
Dr. Moore also commented on the absence of fragments of broken glass in Mr. Depp's injury. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
And how does the absence of glass fragments factor into your analysis?
It really doesn't. I've seen hundreds, if not probably at least 500 or more glass injuries, and I would say probably the majority you don't see glass in these injuries. It is much more common to see glass embedded in the wounds when you're talking about very fine glass.
Yo hoy
if,
no voy a estar
say
traduciendo todo el
a wine
tiempo, voy a
glass would
traducir
explode or
por
something of
momentos
that
o
nature
por
where you get little
periodos
tiny shards.
comentando,
But in
porque
general,
si
when you
no,
have thick glass, such as you see in a bottle or
así que se van a
or
entender muchas
pane of
veces.
glass, because they break into bigger pieces, and you generally don't see the glass, but you certainly can, but it's not surprising that you don't.
Can you definitively state how this injury occurred?
No, nobody can definitively state.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
All right, cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Dr. Gilbert.
Good morning.
Now, you're being paid $1,000 an hour for your work on this case, correct?
Correct.
And you agree, just to sum up how Mr. Moniz finished, you agree that the finger injury could have been caused by any number of things, right?
Yes.
And you're not offering an expert opinion on what you believe caused the finger injury, correct?
Correct.
And you're aware, you said a few times Miss Heard's account or Miss Heard's explanation, right? You remember saying that?
Yes.
You're actually aware that Amber has said she doesn't know how he lost his finger. You're aware of that, right?
Yes.
So when you were just talking about Miss Heard's account or Miss Heard's explanation, you're aware she's never actually given an explanation for how she thinks he lost his finger, correct?
No.
Yes. You're aware that Miss Heard testified, and this was from your deposition, you're aware that she testified she doesn't know how he got his fingertip chopped off. You're aware of that, right?
Asked and answered, Your Honor.
Overruled.
No, I'm not. I reviewed the records, and in one of the testimonies depositions that I reviewed, it was described that that potentially it was lost when he was punching against the wall with a phone.
And on that, the last point there, I think we agree. Miss Heard's testified in this trial and previously that she saw him smash a phone to smithereens, a wall phone. You'd agree with that, correct?
Correct.
But she doesn't know if that was what caused him to lose his finger. You agree with that, correct?
I agree. I cannot speak for her, but yes.
Okay. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Dr. Gilbert, you gave a deposition in this case on March 17th, correct?
Correct.
You were under oath in that deposition. You swore to tell the truth, correct?
Correct.
Okay, if you could turn to page 61, please. You see there are four pages per page of paper. It's on page 16 of the document. Okay, line 9, you're asked a question, and then Amber's response to that question, that's the line 9. Can you read that, please? Answer, I do not know. I did not see his finger go off. Question, and Dr. Gilbert, are you aware that Amber did not see Mr. Depp's finger go off? Answer, I mean, I'm aware that, well, I'm aware from reading, I am from reading this. I'm aware of the mechanism that she claimed would cause the finger injury. Question, but have you read anything so far that indicates she doesn't know how the finger injury happened? Answer,
Ahí lo está
so far
confrontando
from what I'm
respecto a un
reading
testimonio
here,
que él
yes.
hizo.
Did I read that right?
Yes.
And you've heard no testimony in this trial from Ms. Heard that the finger injury was definitively caused by the phone, so that she doesn't know, correct?
Correct.
And you'd agree that the fingernail was uninjured. You said that, right?
Correct.
And the nail bed was uninjured.
Correct.
Correct. But the area under the fingernail, in the pulp of the finger, that's where the injury took place, right?
It was not isolated to the pulp, no.
But it didn't injure the fingernail. That's my
Correct.
question. Okay.
Yes.
And under Mr. Depp's alleged theory, Amber threw a vodka bottle at him from 10 feet away or so, right?
Correct.
And you testified you have no way to determine the angle that the bottle was coming from.
Correct.
Right? But she threw it on a downward trajectory, correct? She didn't. There's no allegation. You've never read anything that she somehow underhanded it so it came up to his finger, right?
Correct.
And there's no way to tell, as you testified, what exact direction it came from, right?
Correct.
And the glass exploded, but you've already testified there was no glass in the wound, right?
Correct.
You haven't read any record of that in any medical records, correct?
Correct.
You also haven't read anything about there being cuts on the rest of his hand, right?
Correct.
And there was no glass found anywhere on the rest of his hand, correct?
Correct.
No.
Correct.
And somehow, under Mr. Depp's theory, that bottle hit the bar and his fingers, but didn't damage the fingernail while it amputated the area under the nail, correct?
Correct.
And your explanation of that is that you believe that his hand must have moved at some point during the force of the injury. Isn't that correct?
No, I said it could have, but I did not say that it did.
No, you believe that it did, don't you?
I said that it likely did, but I was not there, and I don't have videotape of the injury, so I can't determine that definitively.
Okay. Well, let's turn to page 25 of your deposition, please, on page 7.
Sorry, page...
Page 25 and 26. So it's page 7 of the document.
Okay.
Sorry if I was unclear on that.
No problem. I'm there.
Okay. Line 18, question, and to be clear, by, quote, sitting in that position, you mean hand down, palmar side down. Answer, that's what he claimed. I mean, according to the history, yes. Question, and would it matter if Mr. Depp's hand was palmar side down? Answer, not really, because it really, and I discussed this, at some point during the force of the injury, which I believe it probably did.
No entiendo cómo funciona la verga esta. Estoy hace 2 horas intentando hacerlo funcionar. Tengan paciencia. Igual no me ve nadie, así que mucho como...
Testimony you gave under oath a month or 2 ago, right?
Correct.
So even though you have never read anything that suggests Mr. Depp's hand moved, his hand moving is the only way that you can fit your testimony into what Mr. Depp wants you to testify to about how the injury occurred, isn't it?
No, that's incorrect.
Okay, that's what you testified to, that if his hand hadn't moved, that there would be a nail bed injury, correct?
That is incorrect. That's not what I testified. That's
In fact,
not what...
Dr. Gilbert, there's another explanation for how Mr. Depp somehow suffered an injury that didn't injure his nail one bit, but injured underneath the nail. And that explanation is that it didn't happen how Mr. Depp says it did, correct?
I cannot make that assumption, nor can you.
No further questions. Thank
All
you.
right, redirect.
Dr. Gilbert, just very briefly, the absence of other cuts on Mr. Depp's hand, how do you factor that into your analysis?
There are a host of mechanisms of injuries you'd more likely see other, so again, if you're, I'm just using this as an example, if you're punching against a wall, you would more likely see multiple injuries to multiple fingers. It really just depends upon how the bottle, or how the mechanism of the injury impacted the hand at that point in time.
Ms. Heard's counsel made a point of emphasizing that there were no bruises or other injuries on the hand, right?
Correct.
And how does that fact, if at all?
Well, it doesn't discount anything, but it certainly makes other potential causes of injury more unlikely, meaning punching against a wall or getting the hand slammed in a door or something like that.
Okay. And your discussion of Ms. Heard's explanation of the alternative cause of the injury, was that based on anything other than Ms. Heard's statements?
No.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Doctor, you can have a seat in the courtroom or you're free to go. Thank you. You can just leave it there, that's fine. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right. Your next witness.
Plaintiff rests, Your Honor.
All right, plaintiff rests their rebuttal case. All right. Defendant counter plaintiff rebuttal case? Sure.
Bien, ahí se juntaron otra vez al estrado, van a hablar con la jueza respecto a, obviamente, el testimonio sobre la herida y su opinión. A ver, voy a probar a hablar si se escucha. Bien, tenemos audio, no está duplicado, se escucha bien lo que digo. Yo ahora tengo que coordinar desde dónde voy a escuchar el audio del juicio para no entreverarme. Así que probablemente cierre Twitch en mi teléfono y escuche directamente la entrada de audio. le voy a poner el cargador porque si no esto no me va a aguantar mucho. Les cuento que el OBS, que es el sistema que yo uso, me consume batería como loco. Por eso es que estoy cargando a full directamente, ni me baso en la... Perdón, pero los mocos. Directamente no puedo usar la batería, que se acaba al toque. Bien, volvemos. ¿Hay más evidencia? Sí, llamamos a otro testigo, señor Aki.
All right, rebuttal evidence.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Murphy?
We call Mr. Julian Acker.
All right. Mr. Ackard? Yes, be sworn.
Le dice, por favor, jure que es la verdad y nada más que la verdad. Y
Do you solemnly swear or affirm to testify truthfully in this case for penalty of law?
Julian Acker se llama. Bueno, y él le pide que cuente
Good morning. Morning. Can you please state your
su
name?
educación.
Julian Ackert. And can you please describe your educational background following high school?
I have a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science from the University of Virginia.
What is your profession?
I am a computer forensics investigator.
Where are you employed?
I work for a company called iDiscovery Solutions, or IDS.
And what is your title?
I'm a managing director at that company.
What services does IDS perform?
IDS provides consulting, expert testimony, forensic analysis, data analysis, electronic data review and production services, all to the business and legal community.
What, if any, of those services performed by IDS have you performed?
I perform all of those services.
How many years of experience do you have in computer forensics?
Extracting data from collections as well as analysis and metadata analysis of the evidence that I extract.
You mentioned collecting data from forensic collections. What material are you forensically imaging?
This would be any type of material that stores digital evidence. An iPhone, an iPad, a tablet, laptop, a cloud account, your Gmail account, anything that has digital evidence.
Have you published in your areas of expertise?
Yes, I've published on data preservation and collection and analysis strategies.
Have you ever given any trainings or presentations to other individuals in the e-discovery area?
Yes, I have. I do trainings and presentations to lawyers through continuous learning education.
What, if any, professional certifications do you have?
I have a GIAC GCFE, that's the GIAC Certified Forensic Examiner certification.
And what were the requirements of obtaining that certification?
To obtain that certification, you need a minimum number of hours in the field, as well as you need to pass a test with a certain degree of, a certain percentage of passing.
Do you belong to any professional organizations?
I do. I'm a member of a conference called the Sedona Conference. It's a conference that is a group of legal professionals, judges, and technologists, and we discuss the intersection of law and technology issues in the legal community.
Have you previously served as an expert witness?
Yes, I have.
And when did you first serve as an expert witness?
I believe that would have been around 2009 was the first time I served.
Have you previously been qualified as an expert witness in the field of computer forensics?
Yes, I have. I've been qualified probably a half dozen to a dozen times in both federal and state court, including this court right here.
And has a court ever declined to qualify you as an expert witness?
No, they have not.
Your Honor, I offer Julian Acker as an expert in the field of computer forensics.
No objection, Your
All
Honor.
right, so moved. Could you just spell your last name for me, Mr. Ackard?
Ackert, A-C-K-E-R-T.
Thank you so much, sir.
Mr. Acker, what is forensic imaging?
Forensic imaging is the process of capturing the data on a digital device in a forensically sound manner.
And how is a forensic copy created?
Using specialized software that's available to forensic investigators, we're able to collect the data from devices, and that software may vary depending on the device, like a phone or a laptop.
What type of information does a forensic image collect?
It's meant to really collect everything on the device. So for example, on a laptop, it's going to collect your documents, your emails, your photographs, your documents like Excel spreadsheets, PDF files, any applications that you ran, the history of what you've opened or looked at on the laptop, as well as all of the metadata for these different types of electronically stored information files.
And does any other information accompany that information that's collected?
Typically with a forensic image, you're also going to get log files. Log files are files that help you validate the forensic image and verify that it was a forensically sound data collection.
And how do log files enable you to do that?
Log files list information within the files. Sometimes they're even embedded within the images themselves, but they provide verification information that allows you to authenticate the image and the data on the image.
What is the purpose of creating a forensic image of devices or data?
In order to extract and analyze data forensically for the courts, you need to create a forensic image of the data first and gather the data from the forensic image.
And what, if any, specific types of data are collected in that image and extraction?
It's going to be any type of data that comes from the image, whether you're extracting photographs or documents or spreadsheets or anything of that nature.
Do you recall Mr. Neumeister mentioning the term hashing yesterday?
I do.
What is that?
Hashing is essentially a digital fingerprint of a file. It's an evaluation of the binary ones and zeros, or how the file is stored on a hard drive, and it examines the ones and zeros in a manner that gives every file a digital fingerprint, essentially, and identifies the uniqueness of the file.
And what, if any, applicability does hashing have to the visual appearance of data?
Hashing has nothing to do with the visual appearance. For example, if I had a Word document that I printed and then saved, therefore I haven't visually changed the Word document, the metadata of that Word document indicating that I printed it would be different, and therefore that Word document would not hash to the version that I used before printing.
Can you give any examples of digital photographs that visually appear the same, not hashing?
I believe Mr. Neumeister included 3 of those in his demonstratives yesterday, 3 side-by-side photographs that looked visually the same but did not hash. It made sense that they wouldn't hash. Each of them had different file sizes. And a file size can change for a photograph depending on what you do with the photograph. So for example, maybe you want to take that photograph and email it to somebody, and on your phone, you choose to use a small, medium, or large, or different size of the photograph when you email. When you send that email with that photograph, you've changed the hash value because you've changed the ones and zeros because you've changed the size of the photograph.
And what, if anything, do you recall from Mr. Neumeister's testimony regarding Photos 3?
Mr. Neumeister was concerned about a particular metadata field, EXIF metadata, which there's 2 types of metadata for files. There's the embedded metadata, which is what we're discussing here, the EXIF metadata, and external metadata. And Mr. Neumeister was concerned with embedded metadata within the file that indicated that the software version that the file last ran through was Photos.
What is Photos 3.0?
Photos is actually the software application that's built into the Apple Macintosh operating system for laptops. This is the application that launches by default when you're on an Apple computer and use Photos.
What are the capabilities of Photos 3.0?
There's multiple capabilities for it. You can, for example, create an album with it and put multiple photos within an album. You can organize or sort your photos by date and time taken or place. You can also use that to edit photos.
You mentioned metadata earlier. What is that?
Metadata is information about a file. For example, with a document, it could be when was the document created or last saved, or who saved it, who was the author of the document. For photographs, metadata includes information that you've seen on demonstratives before, including when was the image taken, what kind of phone took the image, what software was originally used for that image. Any type of information inside the photograph, the EXIF data that you've heard, is metadata.
Did you form any opinions in response to Mr. Neumeister's testimony regarding Photos 3.0 appearing in a software EXIF metadata field?
Yes, I did.
And what are those?
My opinion is that that for each of the photos that he identified, for all but one in his demonstrative, I actually found the equivalent original photo that did not have photos in the EXIF metadata. In other words, those are the photos that he was indicated he would have expected to see the iOS or the phone software version on those photos.
How do you know it is an original version of the photograph?
This is a little bit dependent on the Apple ecosystem. Amber uses Apple devices, and those devices, by definition of how Apple works, synchronize your information from device to device. So for example, if you take a photo on your phone, you see that same photo on your tablet or your iPad or your iCloud account, or even your MacBook. And that's all because of user experience. Apple wants you to be able to see and visually have the same experience on all your devices. So the photo that was originally taken traverses or gets synchronized to other devices by design of Apple, and that synchronization process does not affect the metadata that we're talking about here, which is the embedded metadata.
When you say that a version of iOS software was listed in the software EXIF metadata field, what does that mean?
That means that the photo was not saved using the Photos application.
And what, if any, data sets did you use to come to that conclusion?
I used all of the data sets that I collected or were collected for Amber, including mobile devices, tablets, laptops, etc.
Michelle, can you please pull up Defendant's Exhibit 1671? Do you recognize this chart, Mr. Eckert?
I do.
What is it? Without yet saying what the contents, just generally, what is it?
This is a chart I created as part of my report.
Your Honor, permission to publish Defendant 671 is a demonstrative.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right. It'll be published as a demonstrative.
Mr. Eckert, can you please describe in more detail what the information in this chart? Michelle, if you could just stay at the top for a quick second. A little further up.
Great, thank you. This chart represents for each of the items in Neumeister's report, which his demonstrative was based on, the page number of the item on his report and the items that I found on Ms. Hurd's devices that did not indicate the software metadata field showing photos. Rather, they indicated that they were the original software metadata field of iOS.
And do you see the second column titled Neumeister Report Date Captured?
Yes, I do.
What does the information in that column mean?
This is the date-time metadata of the particular photo on Neumeister's report. So, for example, the first row, 23, the date-time captured, or the date captured is December 16th, 2015. The second row, 24, you see that the date time is May 21st, 2016. Third row, May 21st, 2016. Fourth row, May 21st, 2016.
Can you just scroll to the next page, please, Michelle? Please continue for the items on this page.
The top row of this page, the one that came from Neumeister's report, page 30, shows December 16th, 2016. And then finally, 32 shows March 23rd, 2013.
Do you see, can you scroll back to the top, please, Michelle? Do you see the, all the way to the top, I'm sorry, the right-hand column of this chart?
Yes, I do.
And where it says device ID and file name?
Yes.
Can you please explain what the information in that column means for each of the items identified from Mr. Neumeister's demonstrative?
So these are the evidence IDs, and evidence ID is the ID value I give to a particular piece of data that I collect, for example, a phone or a laptop, and the matching file name found on that evidence ID that indicated the original version of the same photograph that Neumeister identified that did not show photos in the software metadata and rather showed the iOS version in the metadata.
And what do the little A, what does that mean?
Those are evidence IDs. Anything with an A number is the evidence ID of an actual device collected. Anything that starts with a backup and follows by another number is an iTunes backup.
So what, if any, what items in this right-hand column, based on the coding you have here, are iTunes backups?
Only the ones that start with the word backup. Even the ones that start with an A number are actually an iTunes or an iOS backup in iCloud. So your phone can actually be backed up to iCloud, and those are coming from an iOS backup in iCloud. Everything else is coming from an actual physical device.
Can you just take this down for a second, Michelle, and pull up 1675, please? Defendant 1675. And do you recognize this chart, Mr. Ackert?
Yes, I do.
Without yet getting into the contents, can you please describe generally what it is?
This is a chart that I prepared as a summary of my findings.
Permission to publish Defendant 1675 is a demonstrative, Your Honor.
Any objection?
No objection.
All right, 1675 will be published as demonstrative.
Can you please describe in more detail what the 3 columns you can see in this chart represent?
Sure, this starts to give some detail about the particular evidence ID. So for example, A001 was an iPhone X of Amber's that was collected. A002 was an iPad of Amber's collected. A11, 12, and 13, slightly down, are 3 different laptops that were collected for Amber.
And do you see the IDS evidence number column?
Yes, I do.
Do you see the source type column?
Yes, I do.
And the source details column?
Yes, I do.
Can you please describe what those columns mean?
Generally, the IDS evidence number is the evidence number that we assign to a particular piece of evidence, and the type and details come from a description of that type of evidence based upon the collection set.
And Michelle, can you please do a side-by-side of 1675 and 1671? Thank you. So, Mr. Ackert, can you please describe the relationship between these 2 demonstrative exhibits?
Certainly. If you look at 1671, the one on the left, you can see in the 4th column the different evidence IDs where I identified the original versions of those same pictures that Mr. Neumeister had specifically identified and the sources of where they were identified. So if you look at the first one, for example, the picture Neumeister referenced on page 24, or I guess that's the second one, there are equivalent versions or original versions of those that do not show the software EXIF metadata field of photos. Rather, it shows the original iOS version on A001, which was Amber Heard's iPhone X, A002, which is Amber Heard's iPad Pro. Scrolling on down through there, you see it on A0011, which is Amber Heard's laptop, same with A0012 and 13. You can see this again with the next row that's visible at the very top. Neumeister identified a photograph on page 30 taken on December 16th, 2015, and he was concerned about the EXIF metadata of that, showing the software version of photos. The original versions of those were found again on A001, that's her iPhone X, A002, her iPad, and it's not surprising to me that I found